What's going on, everybody? It's ShamefulPenguin here, back with another video. Today we're going to be getting into my Stormbraid Assassin Cold Conversion build guide for 3.16 Scourge League. This build I've played multiple times, and I fell in love with this about 3 leagues ago, and Stormbraid's one of my favorite builds to play, so I like coming back to it every league, seeing how it changed, and there was a lot of changes this league, so keep in mind to that if you look at any of my old build guides, there are a decent amount of notable changes. At first glance at this build, when I was building it, I was actually pretty scared because I noticed it was like 30% DPS loss, so I was pretty worried about that. But in the end, I managed to actually increase the amount of DPS and boss DPS with a medium tier investment. I would say if you have about 10 exalts, you'll be able to pretty much do all I want to do with this build, and that's all you're going to need. You can get this started on probably about 2 to 3 exalt, but maybe more. I would recommend starting out with a 6 link on this build, so maybe a 5 exalt budget is what I would recommend starting at, because you want to get your 6 link as soon as possible, because on a 5 link it doesn't feel that good. You can get up to yellow maps on a 5 link, I would recommend, but anywhere in red maps I would recommend having a 6 link impulses. So another thing about this build is that it is very unique heavy, so it's actually really easy to gear because it's a ton of unique, so you don't have to like pay as much attention to rares and stuff. But another problem that comes with unique dependent builds is that we don't have many rare slots, so we're really starving on maxing out our resistance, and we don't have much defenses, so we don't have a lot of life, a lot of ES, so we are just trying to get that where we can. There are ways to make this more defensive, but I just think I'm a softcore player. Let's just make it do more damage and call it a day. That's honestly my opinion. If you're doing this in like hardcore, I don't recommend this build at all, but it can do all content with enough investment in this build. I am confident in that because just watch my build last league, and I can do more damage than that with more investment. So let's go over the build. For the gear, there's a lot of uniques, so I'm going to be listing them off. I'm going to be explaining just a little bit about them. If you're confused, make sure you leave a comment down below asking the reason we're using things, or if you're confused about interactions, I can try to explain it. But I'm going to be pretty quick with explaining what each one does, and I'm going to be just highlighting anything important about them. So first are their weapons. We're using 2 void batteries because we're ultimate juicers. We want as much damage as possible. We're scaling crit, and we get an additional power charge from each of our void batteries, so why not just do the most amount of damage? So we're power charge scaling, and these are the best ones you can use. Next, we got our helmet. Our helmet is really reliant on what budget you have. If you have a medium budget, like I'm hoping you guys do for this build, just get a +1 power charge, like Hubris Circlet or whatever base you want on your helmet. I recommend Energy Shield because we are hybrid, but you want a +1 to maximum power charges. It's a Warlord, eye level 75 I believe roll, and you want that because it's your biggest DPS increase on pretty much any of your gear pieces that you can get. So +1 power charge is what we're looking for. Max life, energy shield, and resistance are secondary things you're going to want. You can also get crit multi on your helmet, or nearby enemies have additional cold damage. Those are also good rolls, but power charges are what you're looking for on your helmet. For your body armor, we're using our unique impulses. So Impulse of Broken Heart, if you don't know what it does, is when you kill an enemy that shock, they explode, dealing 5% of their life as lightning damage, and that damage cannot shock. So you'll explode one enemy and it will not explode the enemies nearby, and we can bypass this by using our gloves, Storm's Gift, and that makes it that shocks we inflict spread to other enemies, and enemies you kill are shocked. So Storm's Gift bypasses impulses. You can enemies are unaffected by shock, so we just get more shock, and that's when you get the chain explosions, because we're scaling the impulses 5% damage, we're converting that to cold, and then we're scaling that damage. That damage can also crit, so eventually if you kill one guy, it'll kill every person around it because we're scaling that damage so high. So that's the goal of this build. And yeah, that's the key mechanics of this build, are the body armor and gloves. Next, we got our boots. Our boots are rare boots. You want Tailwind elusive boots if you can get your hands on them. Get life, resistance, and energy shield on your boots as well if you can. But either pick one, Tailwind or elusive, with a good mix of resistance and life if you have like a medium tier investment. And that's what I'm going to be doing for a while probably. Next, we got our amulet. Our amulet is Badge of the Brotherhood because we're ultimate juicers in trying to map as fast as possible. So we get 10 power charges at the peak of our build, and we can turn that 10 power charges into 10 frenzy charges with this amulet. And 10 frenzy charges are insane. It gives us a lot of movement speed and damage, so just hard to pass up. Pretty much the best in slot amulet for mapping. But if you are bossing, this is an amulet you do not want on you because it's doing nothing for you. Next, we got our rings. So we have 2 Call of the Brotherhoods. This is really important because we're converting our lightning to cold, and then we're scaling a lot of cold damage on our build, cold pen, all that stuff. That's why you see like hypothermia, and you see cold pen support for the bossing and all that kind of stuff, is because we're converting our lightning damage into cold so we can scale it, we can shatter enemies. Just getting all that nice explosion defensiveness of being at chilling enemies and freezing them and stuff. So it's really easy to scale damage with cold, so that's why we're doing that. An important thing about these rings is that you want to use the catalyst, turbulent catalyst, that it says adds quality that enhances elemental damage. And if you hover over your Call of the Brotherhood, you see that the lightning damage converted to cold is a elemental and a damage roll. So if you quality up that, you'll make it even higher. So it's usually 40%, and we can get it to up to 48%. So total we'll have 96% lightning converted to cold, which is, I mean, ideally you want 100, but this is the best we can get, so we'll take it. And yeah, so make sure you catalyst them up as soon as you can, because missing out on that damage, it's just free damage. You just might as well do it. Lastly, we got our belt slot. Our belt slot can change pretty drastically. So Headhunter and Mage Bullet, obviously best in slot choices. Let's get that out of the way. We actually scale really well with Headhunter on this build, with all the area damage and the speed and all that stuff. So try that out if you have the budget. But other than that, you want a Stygian Vise or a leather belt, or even a crystal belt. But I recommend leather belt because of the conversions we're using on life. And you're just going to want to have big life and big resistance, because you're going to be struggling to max out your resistance on this build. So your belt slot hopefully fixes that for you. Now we're going to be getting into our cluster jewels. So our cluster jewels, we're going to be looking for our large ones. So you can use up to 2 large cluster jewels on this build. I recommend using 1 if you're following my POB, because 1 just seems like it's enough damage. But you can opt up to 2 if you want to be a full juicer, and you can use none if that's your that's what you feel like doing. But I recommend using 1 large and 2 mediums. So for the large cluster jewel, you want a cold damage cluster jewel, and you want Blanketed Snow for that cold pen, and Snowstorm for the 8% lightning as extra cold, which is pretty crazy. These are 2 really good notables that you're going to want. And the third one, you're going to want something like Disorienting Display for blind, or Doriani's, or Widespread Destruction. Whatever your third one is, it doesn't really matter as much as the other 2. As for your mediums, you're going to want a crit damage cluster jewel. We don't use brand ones anymore because it's not the highest DPS help anymore since the nerfs. We're using crit damage or crit chance jewels with quick getaway that gives us cast speed, movement speed, and crit chance, and then pressure points, which gives us 5% chance to deal double damage with crits, and pretty much always critting. So, and then yeah, additional crit chance. So crit damage medium jewels are the way to go. There is an option, a little tech that you could use, is you could use area damage with like vast power and magnifier, or vast power and the one that gives you life. Because scaling area damage also does help with scaling the Impulses explosion. So that is another way to help you out. It is a little bit less damage, but if you're crit capped for whatever reason, pressure points may not be the most useful. You could use the area damage ones. That's another option. It might be cheaper, but quick getaway, pressure points are your two best mediums. Now for the other jewels we're using, I'm going to go over the unique jewels. So you can use a Watcher's Eye, definitely. Hatred Watcher's Eye with the crit is your best choice. Zealotry with the crit pen is also really good. I'm not opting to use a Watcher's Eye until I buy more of my items and upgrade them. So Watcher's Eye is not my priority list, but it can be. Another one is Glorious Vanity. You're going to want a Glorious Vanity with Doriani. That's because we place it in a specific spot to get Corrupted Soul. And Corrupted Soul just gives us 15% max life as extra ES, and that makes us even more hybrid, more defensive. Hopefully we die less with that. Yeah, but we're gonna get into the rare jewels because that's what I really stack in this build, which I define as the most important. So there's two types of cluster jewels you want to, or of rare jewels you want to use. So you're going to have some jewels that just fix your resistance, and then the rest of the jewels are just pure damage. So the jewels to fix your resistance, I have a ton of jewels because we suck on resistance on our builds. So try to get as much all resistance or just resistance where you can with increased maximum life on it, and just try to max out your resistance as much as you can, because yeah, max resistance, no brainer, you always need that. But also you're going to want to have some good damage on your cluster, or on your rare jewels. I don't know why I keep saying cluster. On your rare jewels, you're going to want crit multi wherever you can. Crit multi with lightning skills, flat global crit multi with elemental, just all of that stuff. You want crit multi. Crit chance doesn't really help us as much because you can hit crit cap pretty easily on this build with enough power charges and all that stuff. So try to get crit multi on all your cluster jewels where you can. And the next best choice other than crit multi is cast speed, because Stormbrand, the frequency it activates scales off your cast speed. So that's another thing you could utilize. Now I'm going to be getting into the gem setup. So first we're going to go over the 6-link Stormbrand. There's two different setups you can opt for. There's a mapping and a bossing setup. You do not have to swap between them at all, but if you're going to take on Cyrus, I do recommend, or Shaper or whatever endgame boss, I do recommend making at least one gem swap just for additional DPS, because some of it's unnecessary, but do it at your own discretion. I'll just go over it just in case you want to use it ever. So Stormbrand, we're linking Inspiration because we want our mana cost to be lower, and it gives us a lot of elemental damage and crit, so just pretty free. Awaken added lightning damage because it's a huge DPS increase. Even added lightning damage at level 20 is really strong, but getting Awakened and getting that to level 6 is very, very good. Hypothermia because we like those shatters. It's a clean additional DPS on chilled enemies, so it's just a really good choice. Power charge and crit is a really strong DPS increase if you do get that +1 power charge on your helmet. Getting that 10th power charge sets power charge on crit over the top to make it like pretty much the best, one of the better supports. If you don't have 10, if you have 9, it kind of competes with other support gems, so keep that in mind. And Conk Effect is just a crazy, just more damage multiplier, so it's hard to ignore that for your DPS. And that's what I map with. This is the setup I map with. The only change to that I would make, if you don't like Hypothermia for whatever reason, you can change that out for increased crit damage if that's like your link colors, but that's the only change I would make to my mapping. For bossing, we're going to use whatever the best damage is and not care about mapping as much. And the biggest change between that is changing out our Hypothermia for an Awakened Cold Pen, because against bosses, damage penetration is more important. And then we're going to be swapping out Inspiration for Swiftbrand. Swiftbrand is the biggest DPS support gem that you could use for Stormbrand, but Swiftbrand I don't like using while mapping because it's low duration, of the Stormbrand. It like more than halves the duration it stays alive. So that's like double the amount of clicks I have to make per map, and I want to click as least as I can per map. So that's my choice. But if you want to use Swift Brand during mapping and you want to see your DPS just go off the roof, then go for it. But I don't use Swift Brand during mapping. Next, we got our generic just Flame Dash. We're using Flame Dash for our mobility. We attach level 1 Arcane Surge just to make sure we have Arcane Surge up 24/7, and then we have Brand Recall attached to that just to give ourselves Arcane Surge more often. Brand Recall is really nice. If you do have an Empower support, you can put on Empower support supported with Brand Recall to make the cooldown recovery even better. But with our mastery that we're using on our tree to make Brand Recall cooldown recovery, you don't need it as much. Next, we got our curse on our Hex Touch. So we have Wave of Conviction that will proc our Hex Touch, which procs the Frostbite, and we have Bone Chill on there just to give ourselves a little bit more chill effect, and supported skills just do a little bit more damage when chilled. So Bone Chill is really nice for cold builds just to use as a utility. So yeah, we're cursing with Frostbite. Assassin's Mark is a tiny bit more damage, but we don't have that automatic cursing. And maybe a future build, if I do like a really high budget variant, we'll maybe have a second curse just to have Assassin's Mark, and that'll just make our bossing really good. Next, we got our defensive setup. We have cast when damage taken, Steel Skin, increased duration, just pretty generic, just pretty defensive. We also have a Clarity linked into that same area, unlinked. I have it at level 4 because it feels really comfortable, because we have really low mana regen, and level 4 Clarity makes the build to feel a lot smoother. You can have it at level 1 or whatever level you want to have it feel better, or you can even take it off if it feels a lot better without it. Next, we got our auras. So we're using Hatred, Herald of Ice, and Zealotry. For the changes I would like to make in the future, I would like to have take out Herald of Ice and add in Wrath, but our mana management is not as good with that, and it feels a lot more clunky, so I didn't opt for it, but it is a big DPS increase. So having a level 3 Enlighten is really important if you are using Wrath other than Herald of Ice, but yeah, Enlighten is not mandatory if you're using Herald of Ice. So I think it's just a cleaner setup, and it makes the explosions just a little bit more visually appealing. You can put like a nice MTX on your Herald and watch that explode. Next, we got our portal cast on death, because I die a lot with this build. Don't judge me, I'm a softcore player. You can throw Vol skills on this. I'm using Vol Haste just for the extra DPS. You can put Vol Discipline or Vol Grace if that's what you prefer, but I'm opting to use Vol Haste, cast on death, portal. You don't need Vol Haste to be linked because obviously it's not, it doesn't matter. Now I'm going to be going over the passive tree for this build. It is quite different from 3.15 because of the changes to the entire passive tree. We are using one cluster jewel. I do have another version of this build where we're using no cluster jewels, so we have a few changes. I'll go over that afterwards, but I'm just going to be going over the masteries. I'll go over quickly a few notable changes from the 3.15 tree, and then you guys can look at it yourself. So a few notable changes that you notice that I'm still using Heart of Ice. Heart of Ice is a really solid point because it gives us damage pen, and usually I would want to anoint this because it's so strong, but we have to use our anointment on our infused. So because we need infused, stability, and overcharge to get all our power charges, and this is a lot of travel nodes that's not doing anything for us. It's like 4 travel nodes plus the point, and we could spend those 4 travel nodes on just increased damage, so this is more worthwhile. Also, the other reason that pushed me over the edge to use Heart of Ice was the Cold Mastery to gain Frenzy Charge when you shatter an enemy, so we don't have to use Ice Bite anymore to get our power charges. Now, before I was actually using Cold Exposure. You inflict applies an extra 5% cold res because this is really, really strong. You can see that it adds a ton of DPS just for 1 point on the tree. But I think the mechanics of just getting free power or free frenzy charge generation without using a gem or blood rage or anything like that is much better. And if we can find another way to get another cold mastery, which unfortunately a lot of the cold mastery stuff is down here, so I would like to take another cold mastery for the cold pen because it's very strong. So we take that mastery. We take the life mastery of 50 life and 10% max life, pretty easy going. For the brands, we take brand recall, 50% increased cooldown recovery rate because it's really makes the build a lot smoother, as well as brand mastery, attachment range, more quality of life, but they're really strong. Then we also have reservation mastery because we need that reduced mana reserved. You want that elemental resistance. This is optional. You can totally take this off and save a point and put it somewhere else. And then we want our charge mastery because endurance, frenzy, and power charges. We're basically getting 60% damage from this, so we get a huge amount of DPS because we do have 10 power and 10 frenzy charges. And then I also took the crit one because it's just good because unique enemies are like the only thing we don't one-shot. Most rares we kill pretty fast unless you juice the map really high, but this is just a good point you can take. It's kind of optional. A really good point is actually nimbleness because we get crit multi and cast speed, which are like two of the best scaling things you can do on your build, so that's very strong. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the differences. This node is actually really strong, Stormweaver, because it gives shocked enemies or frozen enemies 5% increased damage. So if they take 5% increased damage, just like almost, that's pretty much a more multiplier. And as you can see, the DPS goes up really high with that. So that's pretty strong. We put our cluster jewel up here. I already went over cluster jewel stuff, but yeah, we put our cluster jewel on the top left. You can use your second cluster jewel and you would put it up here. So you would just spec this and then unspec that point, and that's pretty much it. But I don't really feel like we need a second cluster jewel because there's so many more passive points that we have access to that can do just pretty much the same amount of DPS, if not more, with some added benefits. So that's pretty much it for the passive tree. If there's anything you guys don't understand, or if you guys have some questions on why I didn't take something or why I did take something, feel free to ask that down below. But now we're going to get into the Ascendency. The Ascendency is pretty generic. You go in Stubble Infusion. It's the first thing. You always go that. And then Deadly Infusion. We're just scaling our crit and our power charges, of course. And then third Ascendency, we go Mistwalker because you want that elusive. And elusive is really strong, makes you extra mobile, take less damage, all that kind of stuff. And then as the fourth, we take Opportunistic because just more damage multiplier is really strong. Why wouldn't we ever take that? So that's it for that. Anything else I forget? You got your Pantheons. You can kind of pick what you want, but I chose Bright King stun and can't be frozen is kind of nice, but you can take whatever you want. And Garkon, I took it because less effective shock on me, and I don't know, I feel like reduce effective shock. I feel like enemies shock a lot, so I don't know. Copium, you could take whatever you want, honestly. As for bandits, yeah, take all. You can see that in a POB, obviously. And yeah, that's all I had for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I hope you enjoy the build. Leave a like and a sub down below. I really appreciate your guys' support. If you want to see me do any other kind of builds, or if you guys have any ideas how to improve this build or whatever, always leave a comment down below. I read every single comment on my channel. So yeah, thank you guys for checking it out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.